So before I launch into freedom of speech versus respect for the sacred in Judaism, just another word or two about what I do and our organization. I'm the director of education at TRUA, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, which is formerly known as Rabbis for Human Rights North America. We're an organization that represents about 1,800 rabbis and cantors across the Jewish spectrum here in North America. We work to advocate for human rights in North America, in Israel, and in the occupied territories. Spending our effort kind of 50-50 here and over there as an expression of what it means to us to be an American Jew, that you live here and Israel's the Jewish state, and so you're kind of this creature of dual identity. So in thinking about freedom of speech and respect for the sacred, what came to mind was a story from the Talmud, which is the enormous, fills an entire bookshelf, book of Jewish law and lore that was compiled around the year 600 and is the basis for pretty much all of modern Judaism. So I'll tell you the story and then just add a few editorial comments about how I see it in this context. So the story is from Bava Metzia 59b. Bava Metzia is a book of the Talmud that focuses on damages and kind of interpersonal law. What happens if I dig a hole and your goat falls into it, or what happens if I hurt you, like I punch you and I hurt you, what do I have to pay for damages, etc., etc. And so the story starts out as being about a certain kind of oven. And the details really aren't that interesting. A certain kind of oven and whether or not it can become impure. And all the rabbis say, yes, it has the potential to become impure. And one rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, says, no, it can't. It's kind of perpetually pure. And they're arguing back and forth. And Rabbi Eliezer gives every single argument he can think of to convince his colleagues of why it can't become impure. And they don't agree with him. And finally, in exasperation, he says, if I'm right here, let the carob tree prove my point. And they all look out the window, and the carob tree uproots itself, flies 100 feet, and replants itself. And they say to him, Eliezer, you can't prove a point in a legal debate from a flying carob tree. And he says, okay, if I'm right, then let the stream outside prove my point. And they look outside the window, and the river that flows by the house of study has reversed its course and now is flowing backwards. And they say, it's a nice trick, but you can't prove your point in a legal debate from a flowing river. And he says, if I'm right, let the walls of the house of study prove my point. And the walls of the house of study start to fall in on the rabbis sitting in the house of study. And another rabbi, Rabbi Joshua, gets up and admonishes the walls and says, what are you doing? How dare you collapse on us while we're studying in here? And so the story says that the walls couldn't go back to upright out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer, and they couldn't collapse out of respect for Rabbi Joshua, so they remained kind of tilted to this very day, wherever that house of study might have been. So finally Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, if I'm right, let a divine voice come down and prove my point. And lo and behold, God speaks up and says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's always right. And Rabbi Joshua gets up and quotes God's words right back, quoting the Torah, Deuteronomy. He says, it's not in heaven, which is to say, God, you gave us the Torah, and you've handed it into our hands, and now it's up to us to interpret it. So you don't get to come down here and tell us what it means, because now it's up to us to decide what it means. And then there's a sort of coda on the story that another rabbi encountered Elijah the prophet, who in this genre of literature is sort of a go-between between God and people. And he asks Elijah, what did God say in that moment? And Elijah says, God laughed and said, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. And that's often where people end the story. And I think when we teach the story with just that framing, it's a story about freedom of expression. I'm saying you say whatever's on your mind, and you argue about it, and the whole point of Judaism really is to debate and disagree and argue about a point. The thing is, the story in the Talmud keeps going. In fact, that's only the first act of a two-act story. So after this, Rabbi Joshua basically tells God to shut up and go away. The rabbis then have to decide what to do, and they take a vote. It seems like Rabbi Eliezer leaves the room. Presumably he's frustrated with the way things have gone. And the other rabbis take a vote and they excommunicate him. And moreover, they decree that anything that Rabbi Eliezer had ever declared pure is now impure, because they have this fundamental disagreement with him about what can and can't become impure. And then the question is, who's going to go tell him? Right? Nobody wants to be the messenger. And so Rabbi Akiva, who's another one of the great rabbis of that generation, says, I'll go tell him so that nobody does it in an inappropriate way. He only trusts himself to do it right. So what does he do? He puts on black clothing, and he goes to Rabbi Eliezer's house, and he approaches him and says, in this sort of oblique way, Master, it appears to me that your companions hold aloof from you. And then he sits down on the ground and starts acting as if he's in mourning. He tears his clothes, he cries, and that's his way of, he can't come right out and say to Eliezer that he's been excommunicated, but that's his way of indicating what happens. And things go very badly for the world. Crops start failing left and right. Rabbi Eliezer develops these sort of laser eyes, and everything he looks at burns up. So Ibrahim, as you were talking in your introduction about your son and how he gets violent when he can't express himself, that's what I see in this part of the story, where he can't express his anger any other way, and so you get this pyrotechnics. Rabbi Gamliel, who's the sort of chief rabbi, happens to be on a ship at the time. I don't know, maybe he's going to Rome to pay a state visit or something like that. And this enormous wave comes out of nowhere, and it's gonna capsize the ship and kill him. And Gamliel says, God, I know this wave is only here on account of Rabbi Eliezer, but please, God, know that everything I only did for your honor. And the wave subsides and goes away. And Rabbi Gamliel goes away on his business. And now the scene shifts, and we're back in Rabbi Eliezer's house, and we're introduced to another character, Rabbi Eliezer's wife, whose name is Ima Shalom, which in Hebrew means mother of peace. And it's really interesting because she's one of a very few women who get named in the Talmud. And she's not only Rabbi Eliezer's wife, she's Rabbi Gamliel's, the chief rabbi's, sister. So she's in this interesting in-between place between the two sort of opposing characters in the story. And it seems that ever since the day that Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated, every morning there's a part in the morning service where he has the opportunity to fall down on his face and express his private prayers to God. And every day, Ima Shalom stops him from doing that because she has this sense, she knows that if he gets down on his face and pours out his heart and all of his grief and anger, God will hear him and God will act on that. And she doesn't want to deal with the consequences of that. But on this one particular day, she's distracted by a beggar at the door. There's a beggar at the door. She goes to give the beggar some bread. She comes back and she finds Rabbi Eliezer on his face, praying to God. And she kind of says, get up, you've killed my brother. And at that very moment, they get a messenger, in fact, saying that Rabbi Gamliel has died. And that's where the story actually ends. So this second act of the story kind of raises the stakes to a whole new level and shows us that that when you embarrass somebody, when you have this disagreement in public, really terrible things can happen. And the point is driven home even more strongly when you see how the whole story is framed at the beginning and the end by a whole bunch of axioms and sayings about not embarrassing people. So, for instance, embarrassing someone in public is worse than adultery. Embarrassing someone in public is worse than murder, than killing them. All the gates are locked except the gate of tears, or all the gates are locked except for the gate of hurt feelings. Over and over, this sense that prayer doesn't work and sacrifice doesn't work anymore, but the thing that God listens to is the hurt feelings of someone who's been embarrassed, particularly in public. So when I look at the story in that whole context, I have to say that freedom of expression is a very important value in Judaism, and it's, if not trumped, then at least balanced out by a really strong taboo on embarrassing people in public. So respect for the sacred human being is created in God's image. And so when you embarrass another person, you've transgressed, you've in a sense embarrassed God. And so that's what I have to offer from my tradition in balancing out these two values. And I'm really curious to hear what my two co-panelists have to say.